Computer. Okay. Well, it's 1 minute past the hour, so I'm gonna get this going. Hello, everyone joining us this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Peter Bonilla. I am the Vice President of Programs at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. As Vice President of Programs, a lot of my work these days is managing our faculty programming and development, which includes, for the last few months, this webinar series that we're doing, including today's discussion on the Chicago Statement. I'm going to make just a really quick couple of announcements. My general goal for this afternoon is for me to stay as much out of the way of Mary and our panelists as I can. But a couple of things I'll throw in as we're getting going. First, for those of you who are in our faculty network, a heads up, we should hopefully in the next few weeks be announcing plans on the hopeful return of our faculty conference to Chicago this October. You know, everything when it comes to that kind of programming comes with a TBD these days. But one thing that I'm pretty hopeful for is that regardless of the nature of the in-person meeting, whatever constraints come with that, we're hoping to one way or another have this conference, even if that means doing it virtually. So there will, I'm hopeful, be a virtual component, if nothing else, which means hopefully that if our faculty network members aren't able to be with us in Chicago this fall, hopefully they will be able to tune in some fashion. That's all still in the early stages of discussion, but that's the hope at this point. We're hoping to bring the conference back to Chicago this October, dates and times coming soon. A last couple of things. One more message for people in our faculty network is in the next couple of weeks, keep an eye out for your email, because I'm going to hopefully be sending out our annual, I say annual, this is the second time we'll have done it, our annual faculty network member survey, which, same as last year, for those who participated, comes with the chance of a small cash prize in the form of an Amazon gift card for taking 10 or 15 minutes to help us out with the survey. It gives us really good insights into the nature of our membership and kind of their interests, and it is a really big help in putting together our programming for the year. So that, I think that's everything. Now, a quick word about this afternoon's discussion. In 2015, the University of Chicago passed what has come to be known as the Chicago Statement on Free Expression, and for the last several years, FIRE has actively pushed for the adoption of the statement at universities around the country with a good amount of success. We will, the versions of the Chicago Statement have passed at several dozen institutions around the country, and the last couple of months, Mary Zeller, who you are going to hear from first, has been doing some writing and a lot of research on just what we can say about the Chicago Statement, the effect it's had to this point. She will go first. I will hand it over to her in just a moment. But also with us today, we have Professor John Hasnas from Georgetown University, who has been active in policy reform and including getting the Chicago Statement passed at the institution. And we also have Leila Brammer from the University of Chicago, who oversees an undergraduate program that really takes its mission as putting the Chicago principles into practice and into the curriculum. So I'm very much looking forward to having you hear from both of them, and then we will try to keep as much of our time for questions and answer as possible, because we do have a good number of people tuning in with us today. So that's hopefully going to be about it for me. And now I'm very happy to hand it over to my colleague, Mary Zeller. Mary?
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone who's joined us for the webinar this evening. And a special thanks to John and Leila for joining me on the panel tonight. So just to introduce myself a little bit further, I'm an attorney and I'm part of FIRE's policy reform team. I joined FIRE in 2017, back when we had 20 Chicago Statement adoptions, and now that list has happily swelled to about 79. So we've seen lots of adoptions over the years. And the 5-year anniversary mark in 2020 was sort of what inspired me to take a look back and see what we've really learned. What kind of critiques have we heard? What kind of impact has adopting a Chicago statement had on campuses? And all those important and consequential thoughts. So this webinar is intended to kind of expound on what I talked about in the blog series. We have two great fellow panelists that will help us learn a little bit more about these topics. So I'll briefly outline what I talked about in the blog series, and then I will turn it over to John. But I just wanted to talk a little bit first about the first blog. I discussed what really is the purpose of adopting a Chicago statement on campus. And part of what we learned and what we found at many institutions is that the purpose is to start a conversation on campus, right? It's not to solve every policy issue at a school. Its purpose is to start talking about free expression. What does it mean to the institution? And what does it mean for the campus climate, for the students, and the community at large? We've seen successes and failures. So I don't want to have everyone online think that the Chicago statement is always a success. We've seen failures at institutions. Faculty members have tried to adopt it. An example would be Williams College. Faculty members did not succeed in adopting a Chicago statement, but we've seen plenty of successes. We've had institutions like Colgate and Gettysburg have broad buy-in from students, faculty, community, and the administration. So those are our success stories that we really like to highlight. In addition, we've seen lots of adoption trends. We've seen a huge increase in system-wide adoptions. For example, in 2020, 5 of the 8 adoptions were by systems. And we think that's a great trend that we'd like to see continue, simply because the high-level adoption means that more than just a president of a university is making free speech a real focal point at the university. It's the board. It's someone who is a broad and very high level adoption that we think sends a message. Additionally, I think the most important thing that we'll talk about tonight is going to be the tangible impact of adopting a Chicago statement on campus. So we often get that question from supporters and critics alike is, why should we even adopt a statement? It's just a flowery statement of principles. It doesn't really do anything on campus. And we've been happy to report that we've seen the adoption of a Chicago statement do a lot on campus. We've seen policy impacts. Institutions that have adopted a Chicago statement often then prioritize changing their policies to make sure they're in line with that statement. In addition, we've seen 15 institutions also have a green light. So those weren't always in tandem, but recently in 2020, we've seen a few adoptions in tandem, like Colorado Mesa University. They adopted both the Chicago statement and earned a green light this fall. And finally, we've seen administration change their behavior because they've adopted a Chicago statement. So we've had a couple of examples of the past year where there has been public pressure for institutions to punish speech that was clearly protected. And we've seen institutions that have adopted a Chicago statement cite that statement and say, we promise to uphold free expression and we're going to continue to do so. So we hope that we'll see this trend continue of schools that have adopted Chicago statements really setting an example for other institutions. So in conclusion, I'd like to discuss a little bit more tonight about what is the future of the Chicago statement. As far as trends go, we've seen the pace slowing down. It has been 5 years since the Chicago statement was introduced in 2015, and we've definitely seen the numbers dwindle a bit. But I think there's obviously still work and room for more institutions to adopt. We have 79, and that's just of the institutions that we've tracked so far. So there are plenty of institutions left that could adopt a version of the Chicago statement. Additionally, I'd like to discuss with everyone on the panel, and hopefully we'll get some lively Q&A going, just to talk about, one, how do we ensure that the schools have adopted the Chicago statement stay accountable to those principles? And second, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the relevance and importance of the Chicago statement in 2021. The past year has seen lots of activity around the free speech space. We've seen protests for racial injustice. We've seen a very tense election. All of those have brought about issues surrounding free speech, and the Chicago statement just might be the answer. So with those thoughts in mind, I'll turn it over to John to discuss his experiences.
Okay, thanks very much. I assume that my reason for being here is I can talk a little bit about what things were like at Georgetown. So I'll do some of that. Georgetown is a private institution. It's not covered by the First Amendment. One reason for my interest in having Georgetown adopt the Chicago Statement was Jeffrey Stone, in creating it, patterned the statement on the kind of protections that the First Amendment gives at public universities. If Georgetown adopts, and any private institution adopts, the Chicago Statement, it's as though it's voluntarily applying the level of protection that the First Amendment gives to public institutions to the private institution. I thought that was important for Georgetown. I wanted Georgetown to commit to that level of freedom of expression. I got interested in this in 2015. I think as soon as the Chicago Statement came out, I proposed to Georgetown's faculty senate that Georgetown adopt it. And I posed this in the form of saying, Georgetown can be a leader on this issue. Let's be a leader. Having tried that, we adopted it in June of 2017. So it took 2 years to go from here's a good idea to the university actually adopting it. Along the way, I learned several things. I'll share a few of them with you, and then I'll end by suggesting that once you adopt the Chicago Statement, that's really only step one, you're not done. So the first thing I learned was that perhaps going through the faculty is not the correct route. So what Georgetown did when things were finally done in 2017, Georgetown adopted the Chicago Statement as part of its official university policy. It's not a statement by the faculty. It's not sort of a non-binding statement. It is part of the university policy, which can be cited. I think that's important. When I started out, I didn't realize that that was the way to go. But what happened was, if there's going to be resistance to this kind of thing, it's going to be from the faculty, because typically only faculty members are ideologically driven or are polemical. The bureaucracy, the administration, they're just usually not ideological. And one way in which we were successful was, once the Chicago Statement became the official policy of the university, then all the administrators just got right on board, because their job is to put policy into effect. So very soon after it was adopted, there was a protest. Someone from the Trump administration was going to speak. They wanted to deplatform that person. And the dean of students, who had been one of the main opponents of adopting the Chicago Statement, simply said, nope, here's a policy. We don't do that kind of thing. So it makes a difference, because the administration and administrators see their job as putting policy into effect. So if you can change university policy, you can make a significant change. And that's sort of the positive aspect of it. The way to be successful is to be completely non-polemical, non-ideological. What you have to do is work through the bureaucracy and make it clear that what you're interested in is the good of the institution. You shouldn't have predetermined goals that you know you're going to achieve, because if you're going to get something through a bureaucracy, you're going to compromise. And one of the most effective ways of getting something like this adopted is when somebody's opposed to you makes a proposal that really is not going to be damaging. You simply say, oh, great idea, let's do that. And if you get enough people on board, and you get enough people believing that what you're doing is for the good of the institution, you can be successful. My only advice is you should be patient. Right? It took 2 years, and in the 2-year period, as much progress as I would make forward, that's how much progress would be retarded. And you keep going round and round in circles and through different groups. But eventually, if you're willing to do a great deal of boring work, then you can be successful. That's also why I think only full professors should do this. But people who are ideologically driven, they'll never do the boring bureaucratic work. And so the people that you're dealing with are people who are on university committees. You can be successful. That's probably the sum total of my advice. Be patient, be willing to work through the administration. Don't see people as your enemies. Don't be ideological. And the other thing is, if you're successful, never take credit. Anything that would be identified with me at Georgetown would be opposed. The fact that they don't know I did this is one reason why it's successful. So never take credit. Having said all of this, I have to now sort of give you the other side of things. As useful and as advantageous as it is to have the Chicago statement adopted as overarching policy, what you really want is for it to have some teeth. You want it to make a difference in important cases. And there's a lot of ways in which, once the policy is adopted, people can get around it easily. I'm going to bore you for like 2 minutes by sharing something, by sharing my screen and show you, which is something, it's just an excerpt from an email exchange I was having with the president of the Faculty Senate in how we proceed, but it will show you what kind of issues come up after you have the statement adopted. All right, let me see how quickly I can share the screen and show you this. All right, so hopefully you can see these words. What was happening was, after we adopted the statement, the university, like many universities, because of the change in the Department of Education sexual harassment policy guidelines, went into an intense mode. Let's spend time working on our sexual harassment policy. So at one point, when we were working on this, I got a message. We now have 2 different policies. My statement was, I've read the new sexual harassment policies. I have no opinion on having a Title IX and a non-Title IX harassment policy, because that's what Georgetown did. But what happened was, the next paragraph, I will point out that if the draft of the new sexual harassment policy is accepted, Georgetown has a sexual misconduct policy that says nothing in this policy limits or abridges the university's speech and expression policy, and a speech and expression policy that states the university prohibits expression that violates the university's harassment policy. It's a perfectly circular loop where nothing says anything. And so you get no meaning here. And the risk is that the harassment policy can always overwhelm the speech and expression policy. Right. The direction in which I was going to fix this is down below. I'll show you that as well. This is not decided at Georgetown. This is still an issue. At any rate, what I said was, the fix is simple and straightforward. Eliminate a phrase from the harassment policy. What you want is, the university prohibits expression that violates the law, falsely defames a specific individual, constitutes a genuine threat. Get this out. Violates the university harassment policy, or unjustifiably invades substantial privacy or confidentiality. So that's step 1. Here's the important thing. This is my greatest recommendation to any of you working on this. If you are able to get your university to adopt the Chicago statement, then you also need a paragraph like the following to be included in your speech and expression policy. And this paragraph says, the Georgetown University policy on speech and expression extends to the members of the Georgetown community the same level of protection for the expression of one's religious, philosophical, literary, artistic, political, or scientific views that the First Amendment extends to the students and faculty of public universities. That phrasing is taken directly out of a Supreme Court decision, which states what is protected speech. So this is basically reading the First Amendment into the speech and expression policy. The second sentence is the important one. Accordingly, the university will dismiss allegations of any violation of university policy. Maybe it should be any university policy, that are based exclusively on the content of such views, regardless of how offensive the ideas being expressed may be to others. If you can get this, I call it a safe harbor provision, into the speech and expression policy, then you don't have to worry about speech being restricted by claiming we're just following the university's harassment policy, and that's why we're allowed to stop people from saying the things that they want to say. To give your Chicago statement teeth, you need your speech and expression policy to explicitly recognize that other university policies can't trump the speech and expression policy. You can't violate another policy simply based on the content of the religious, philosophical, literary, artistic, political, or scientific views being expressed. With this on your books, anyone who is brought up on charges of violating the sexual harassment or any harassment policy can cite this, and if it's truly just the content of the speech, have the complaint dismissed. That's what's important. It's not whether you're going to be punished or found liable for violating policy. It's the chilling effect of knowing you can be brought up as violating harassment policy based on what you say that curtails speech. This is what you need to fight the chilling effect that can happen from the threat of punishment. And I'll close with this. This is an example at Georgetown. Georgetown has a club called I think it's Love Saxa Club. It's a group of people who believe that sex should be reserved for marriage between a man and a woman, and you shouldn't engage in premarital sex. You shouldn't view pornography. That's their mission. They were accused of being a hate group because since they believed that marriage was between a man and a woman, that was anti-same-sex marriage. And they were charged in a way that could have resulted in them being defunded. And they had to go through the hearing. They were not defunded. They weren't convicted of being a hate group. But the result was that the members of this group pointed out that the burden of having to defend yourself, of having to go through the entire trial process of being accused of being a hate group was extremely damaging to them. And if you want to make it so that that kind of thing can't happen, you need a safe harbor provision, something like this. Let me stop talking and I'll answer any questions you have later on. This is what I've learned from the last few years of trying to work on these issues at Georgetown.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Chicago. As I told John when I was logging on earlier, I was really impressed with his work and all of his dedicated effort, but also really thrilled that when I moved to the University of Chicago, I had moved out of the policy realm and into more of the student realm of teaching. And so I'm here to talk to you today, not about the policy, but how to put that policy into practice across campus. And again, the program is relatively new. So we're in the process of launching efforts, and obviously I'm sure you've all experienced it, the pandemic has made it harder for us to move forward on some of the things that we wanted to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So the Parrhesia Program for Public Discourse was a program that came out of the college, so for undergraduate students. And it really came out of a recognition that if we're going to have free expression, I mean, obviously the name Parrhesia, the Greek word for speaking frankly, was if we're going to have it and be able to practice it, then we need to build those capacities within students. I was drawn to the position because it really got at what I've always seen as a nexus of democracy and Athenian democracy, these ideas of free expression, both Isagoria and also Parrhesia, and then finally this other piece of rhetoric and how rhetoric is part and parcel of that. And for me, those are all entangled and we can't pull them apart. So my study of rhetoric has always been a study of democratic discourse and how we essentially work toward vigorous, inclusive, and productive public discourse. And so I am launching a program that gets at those questions. My charge is threefold. The first part is that curriculum piece, really primarily developing a curriculum in public discourse, free expression, and the history and theory of rhetoric. And fortunately for me and my understanding, all of those three are really, again, intertwined. And so whatever I'm teaching, I am teaching free expression, I am teaching public discourse, and obviously for me, it's always going to be based in this idea of the history and theory of rhetoric. The idea of the program is to expand out and build those capacities, both in my teaching and hiring more people who can build those skills within a Parrhesia Program curriculum, but also to extend those into other places in the curriculum and on campus. And they already are there in the University of Chicago core. It is a very vigorous discussion. And so making sure that we're pulling pieces together and giving students, when they experience this, an understanding of what they're doing and how they can utilize it in campus discussion, but also in a democratic discussion beyond campus. The ideal here is really key. It's that idea of practice. And I'm going to throw in an analogy here. We would not bring all the students to campus and just throw them in a pool and expect them to swim. For me, discourse is one of those things that's like that. And if you don't like that analogy, we can go with, we wouldn't bring them all to campus and expect them to be able to do the calculations to send a satellite into space, right? Some of them can, some of them can't. So we build those capacities. In that same way, we take discourse for granted that everybody can practice it in a certain way. Building those capacities will help students practice it in a way that it can be vigorous, it can be inclusive, and it can be productive. And they're not more inclined to self-silence themselves or just not get involved in the discussions that are happening. And that is part and parcel of what we're doing with the curriculum. And there's much more there. But I'll move on to the second piece. The second piece is develop programming so that we can bring students together from across campus to do that vigorous discussion on issues of the day. That's one of the places where we've been a little bit hampered in our rollout by Zoom and by the pandemic. But we are launching a series of having experts come talk about issues of the day and then having a way to engage students in the discourse beyond that. So it's not just them listening to a lecture, but them actually actively engaging in the questions that are being brought up by the discourse. For example, we're working on an event right now that'll be on free speech and social media. So bringing in people who are experts on that. And then students are really interested in Twitter bans and on social media and regulation and what does that look like and can it be done? Putting those questions out, having experts bring some expertise to bear on it, and then students wrestling with those questions, not just in the public sphere, but in their own personal lives and in their own personal use of social media. So it's one example of that type of programming. And then finally, the third piece of the position is an outreach piece. And that is the piece of how do we extend and develop those practices in other colleges and universities, and two, K-12 institutions. How do we start embedding discourse in a way that students are coming to campus prepared to engage in the types of critical debate that are necessary for a college campus. And then eventually for me, it's always about democracy, necessary for democracy. If we're bringing students here to engage in those discussions so that we can discover knowledge, how do we get them to be able to engage those ideas robustly I'm always about productively moving ideas forward. So in the outreach efforts, we were to do this last summer and we were canceled, but we will do it this summer in a remote pilot rollout of faculty seminars. So both college and university faculty seminar and then high school faculty seminar, where we'll talk about these principles of discourse. We'll give some examples of ways that they can be embedded in disciplines, not just in communication or in political science but how they can be embedded in scientific discussions in the classroom. How can we practice it across the curriculum, build those discursive practices in ideally every class that they're taking. In the future, would like to build that out into student life to ensure that, with the student life programming, residential hall programming is also mirroring the development of the capacity to communicate about, with, and across differences and disagreements in ways that they're raising questions, testing their ideas, not being stuck in echo chambers, and they're actually growing in the way that they're thinking about the world, and eventually, hopefully, going out into the world and doing that work. So that is a very brief overview. Again, not policy, but how do we develop the capacity for students to practice this well on campus and then in the world beyond campus.
Great. Well, Leila, thank you very much, and thank you to John and Mary as well. I see that we are already starting to get some questions in, and people can feel free to keep them coming. In fact, I have just seen another come in. If one person on this conversation, one of the attendees, didn't mind doing me a favor, this is a little bit of a roundabout way to do this. If one of you didn't mind just opening up a generic question. There are a number of links to some resources that we've discussed and will be discussed, and I can't ask the discussion a question on my own, and I don't have a chat feature equipped that lets me do that. So if someone didn't mind just like opening a random question that I can, oh, and I see someone's already done it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. We are actually doing great in terms of getting through all of our spiels, and definitely that's been helped by me staying out of everyone's way. I'm gonna start taking some questions and start directing some questions. Mary has already written in an answer to one, and we will probably do a couple more of those as we go along. But I'm gonna take. Pardon me. I'm going to take some questions. I apologize in advance for the fact that we probably won't have time to get to all of them. I will, among other things, that I will give people our contact information if anyone wants to email us a question that they have about what's going on at their institutions, or wants to hear a little bit more about what they've heard here today. But I'm going to get right to it. And Mary, this might be a question that you can answer, but I'll try to help with it. A question from one of our viewers asks, how does FIRE's support for the Chicago Statement differ from the work of the AAUP substantially or procedurally? And Mary, you can probably speak better, at least to FIRE's institutional support. I can't speak. I can't speak for the AAUP on this, obviously. I know that pretty soon after the Chicago Statement passed, FIRE, which had supported it from the beginning, kind of undertook a public campaign that you have been heavily involved in, and you've worked with a lot of faculty at different institutions. Is there anything more you have to that question? I'm sort of punting on the question of the AAUP because I'm not sure, as much as I regularly cite to AAUP policies and procedures in my writing and in my past letters to universities when we're investigating one case or another. I can't speak for them there, so I'm not going to. Mary, is there anything more that you might have to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'd similarly have to punt on the AAUP question, simply because, of course, FIRE does not have chapters on campuses like the AAUP does. We don't operate in that way. We just simply, as an organization, have decided to promote the Chicago Statement as a statement of principles that guarantees that a university is going to uphold these principles of free expression. And that's pretty much our stance on it. But feel free to follow up if you have further questions about that.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to take another one, and John, this may be one best suited for you. I'm going to paraphrase the question, try to read it through fairly quickly. Viewer says, my institution adopted the Chicago Statement early on, but its principles are trampled left and right, and our faculty governance is extremely weak. We have departments adopting punitive speech codes, and our provost is advancing policies that enable faculty to file formal complaints against colleagues whose speech is inappropriate or unbecoming. There's no method for exoneration in this proposed policy, and discipline is to be determined by department and college administration. Any advice? And Mary, this might be a question that you can chime in on as well, but I thought of John first, given his discussion of how when you've passed the Chicago Statement, you're at the beginning of a long journey and not at the end of one. So John, is there anything that you might have to that question?
Yes, but I may end up being a little bit repetitive. That description is exactly the problem. If you get your university, if you get your institution to adopt the Chicago Statement, you now have an extremely nice sounding, abstract, general commitment to freedom of speech on the books. And the question is, does it have any teeth and does it do anything? And the answer can be no. It only works if you have people actually invested in making sure that it's enforced in a way that protects speech. And at many institutions, passing or adopting the Chicago Statement means virtually nothing because they have a concept of harassment, where they have harassment policies so that you can harass people based on the content of what you say. The harassment policy and the expression policy are antithetical. And if neither one is structured so that it triumphs over the others, then the university gets the best of both worlds. That, hey, we're committed to free speech, and yet we can suppress any speech we want. That's an administrator's dream. And that's also a nightmare for people who are really committed to freedom of expression. So what you need is step two. Chicago Statement is step one. Step two is something like the safe harbor provision that I proposed before, something that says the speech and expression policy or the Chicago Statement triumphs over all other university policies. In other words, you can't violate another university policy simply because of the content of what you say. You can harass people. You can say things that constitute harassment. There's all kinds of uses of speech that can be suppressed, but you have to have something that's in black and white and is on the books that says if the reason why you're accusing somebody of violating a university policy is because of the content of the speech, then that's dismissed. Don't expect faculty or department chairman. The faculty are not the people who are on your side. They're not the people, they're going to want to do what they want. On a completely different issue, when it comes to things like faculty hiring, nobody that I know at Georgetown cares about what the law is on hiring. They just act based on what they think is right. So the faculty is not going to be the party that's enforcing it. However, the administration, the people whose job it is to actually pay attention to policy, those are the ones that you need to rely on. It's a long-winded way of saying, whoever that institution is not atypical. I think that happens a lot. The only solution is to get something down that says the Chicago Statement trumps other kinds of objections based on speech, and it has to be part of the policy. Therefore, anyone who is subject to a complaint or subject to a suppression simply cites that part of the university policy and says, this says I'm allowed to say that. It's your only hope.
And to piggyback off of what John said, if adopting the Chicago Statement is step one and getting the safe harbor that he described is step two, I think step three is having faculty members, students, interested folks like everyone on this webinar to stand up for the principles and make the administration stand by the principles that they've adopted. I mean, yeah, the censorious internet mob works one way to try and cancel speech. Why don't we all try and make it so it stands up for speech, right? Write an op-ed and say, the president adopted these principles 3 years ago, and now they're trying to adopt this policy that's flying in the face of everything the Chicago Statement stands for. So I think motivated faculty members are a huge part and a huge key to that.
Great, thank you, everyone. Scanning the questions which have continued coming in. Mary, actually, this is probably an ideal one for you. It's certainly one that you will know the answer to better than me. But a question we have from one of our attendees asks, how do the institutions who have adopted the Chicago Statement break down into public and private, and is one more resistant than the other? Now, we've had 80 or so institutions, university bodies, et cetera, passing the statement or some version of it. So I don't expect you to know the numbers off the top of your head, but do you have a sense of the question?
I do. I have the stats right in front of me. Yes, we have 79. We have 49 public and 30 private. So as far as spotlight institutions go, definitely skewed towards it's skewed towards public, which is pretty normal. We often just have a better argument at public institutions for speech codes and for Chicago Statement. You're bound by the First Amendment to uphold these principles. So why not just put it in writing? But we've had success at private universities as well. I think oftentimes that comes from the advocates themselves, usually their students, usually their faculty members. They want to see their institution say in a statement, we support free speech, because of course, as a private institution, they're not bound to uphold the First Amendment.
I'll just add something that underscores that. The tactic that was successful at Georgetown was as follows. I wasn't ideological. I just said, do you believe that students and faculty at Georgetown should have as much protection for their expression as people at public institutions, like people across the river at George Mason University? And that approach tends to be very effective because Georgetown doesn't want to seem as though there's more oppression they're more oppressive than public institutions. So one way of getting a private school to adopt the Chicago Statement is simply say all we're doing is making our school have as much protection as the public universities.
Great, thank you, John. Let's see, another question I have, and they've a couple more have continued coming in. Let me see. Let's see. A question from one of our viewers. At Stanford University recently, the Faculty Senate voted overwhelmingly to condemn the views of a Stanford faculty member, Scott Atlas. Scott Atlas being one of President Trump's advisors on the COVID-19 response. And would the Chicago principles bar such a move at the University of Chicago, or I suppose at any other institution that has a statement of this type? This is probably a question that any number of the panelists on the discussion have a view on. So feel free, anyone who wants to jump in there.
I don't want to dominate, but to me the answer is very clear. The Chicago Statement wouldn't condemn that. Right? The Chicago Statement, at least the way we've adopted it, it's university policy. It says what the university can do officially. It restricts university administration. If faculty members want to say, we think what somebody else said is terrible, if faculty exercising their academic freedom want to say, we condemn somebody else, that's a problem. It's just not a problem that's addressed by the Chicago Statement, which restrains what the university can do in its official capacity.
Yep, I would agree with John. And I think maybe this is something that Leila could chime in on as well, would be, the Chicago Statement, maybe even if we bring it more broadly, would encourage debate and discussion on topics like, a professor's controversial views or a student's blog post or something of that nature. So as John said, it would, ensure that the university is not making those calls as an administration. But of course, faculty members in their individual capacities, students all retain their free speech rights. They're free to criticize. As a matter of fact, they're free to criticize the fact that the institution adopted a Chicago statement. That's something that we'd want to hear. So Leila, maybe you could shine a little bit of light as to, highlighting why that kind of discourse and discussion is critical for continuing learning and making an institution better.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks for the setup on that. I mean, John and Mary, that's entirely true. It is very much like Congress shall make no law. That might not apply then to social media companies. It's that same sort of division, right, that we have to wrestle with. These are issues that are contested and still contested. I think there was another question there about the English department piece that falls into this category at the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago also has a Calvin report that says that the university shall make no stand on social policy or political policy. And so the university itself, it does not make the stand, but the English department can, for its purposes, right, as academic freedom, make decisions about its discipline and how that discipline functions. We can disagree with them. We can disagree with whether that's a direction we want them to go, but that is all open for public discourse. And I promise you that's exactly the email we all got from President Zimmer. When that happened, is that this is all something for us to vigorously debate through open discourse and really tease out and figure out where we all are on it. And the university has some restrictions on it, but where other departments are, where other faculty are, where students are on this. And so it is that idea of raising things up for vigorous academic debate.
Hey, thank you, Leila. The most recent question that came in, this is something I might have a sense of, and I think something that Mary might also have a sense of. The question is, what has been your experience in dealing with faculty associations and unions or other collective bargaining agents? Mary, I'll take a first crack at this answer based on my experiences here. Before I was doing the work that I'm doing now, for 7 years, I was involved in FIRE's individual rights defense program, and I ran the program for a handful of years. And that's the program that is probably the one that people read about in the news most often if they see us in the news. It's, where we do investigations of, allegations of, violations or censorship of student or faculty rights. And a lot of our really good constituencies in those times were faculty unions and faculty senates. For a couple of different reasons. They vary by institution, but a lot of them, in my experience, were very strong. At least on academic freedom, and also, they were very keen on, for lack of a better word, self-preservation. One of the big sort of battles in terms of the pillars of the institution. And I think this is something that probably the circumstances wrought by the pandemic have exacerbated, is that in my experience, faculty are fighting the erosion of their influence and their academic freedom and their collective bargaining and shared governance rights, at the hands of the administration. And this is something that there are a number of structural weaknesses on. When you think of how, right now a lot of universities are hurting financially and are, and a lot of faculty are vulnerable in that situation, that, we're more and more relying on contingent faculty, and tenure is increasingly a kind of elusive perk reserved for a few. So in my experience, faculty unions, I've had a lot of really good relations with them. Again, they vary by campus, but quite often the ones that I've worked with, we've had very good relations, and we've made a lot of really strong allies in that area. Mary, is there anything that you might have to add to that?
Yeah, just to quickly echo your positive outlook. I've also only had good things to say about working with faculty members who are either members of their faculty senate or some in leadership roles in their faculty senate, and definitely mostly have been broadly supportive of the Chicago statement for the reasons that Peter just outlined, looking to be protective of academic freedom and wanting to really see that flourish on their campus.
I will say, it obviously isn't all wine and roses. Is that the metaphor? Did I make that up? I think that's a metaphor.
Sounds good.
It's not all perfect. We've alluded earlier in the discussion to institutions where attempts to adopt the Chicago statement have run aground. Williams College being one of the examples, but I think there are probably a couple of others where they've at least had to take multiple goes at it. And as John says, it's a doing it even seamlessly is a long, arduous, and frequently very boring process. So it's obviously not it's obviously not perfect, and there are significant elements that are skeptical of the need for the Chicago statement, that are doubtful of its utility. Some that simply just don't believe in the principles, which is obviously the right of any faculty member to believe or not believe in the principles of the Chicago statement. But it can make the passage harder. For sure. It goes to the question, one of the first ones that came in, was about Williams College. Question, I believe the Williams student newspaper came out against the Chicago statement while it was being proposed and developed there. The question, and I'll throw this maybe to Mary, maybe to John, what can be done to help persuade these groups to join? And similar, in that vein, are the Northeast small colleges a lost cause? Mary, maybe you could speak to your recent writing and reflection on how universities have had different experiences adopting this in terms of the levels at the community where they get buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. To answer it shortly, no, I do not think that Northeast small colleges are a lost cause, although there has certainly been some recalcitrance in that area. You mentioned Williams College. Yes, the student newspaper and several student groups had a major problem with the faculty wanting to adopt a statement. That's what kind of caused that whole hoopla that I briefly alluded to in my opening remarks. And there were issues at other schools too. I know Middlebury faculty wanted to adopt a statement there, and that failed for similar reasons. So what's the answer, right? How do we convince these students that freedom of expression is important? That's obviously something we're not going to be able to answer in this 1-hour webinar, but maybe something that, again, Leila could shed light on is, I think that all of us, perhaps sitting, listening to this webinar, already agree the fact that freedom of expression is super important on college campuses. But maybe the question is now, how do we get that message across? What's the best way to communicate that, not only to the students, but to the larger university community?
For me, I do think that's a place that we as academic institutions have failed. And I saw a question about K-12 pieces. I really think we've just failed across the board to really underscore the importance of free expression and why we have it as a principle. Why is it so keenly tied to democracy? I think a lot of people can say, yeah, free expression, free speech, we have it. But very few people can get down to the rationale. And I think the more that we show the rationale to students about what it means and how we can support it and why it is important, it will help. I think there's a A second piece of that is also to, and I think I've seen that in a lot of the questions. Look, the Chicago principles will not resolve all the issues. Kind of like what John was saying, you know, you can adopt them, you can even believe in them, and you're still going to have these contestations, right? It's like the First Amendment. It will continue being contested as long as that we have a nation, right? And that is good. We should be contesting our civil liberties all the time. And I think that's a key on campuses is to elevate, first of all, educate, and then contest and have those open, vigorous debates, bring it out into the light and have it be part of what we're talking about all the time. And the more we talk about it, I think the better it is, rather than put it as a policy that lives somewhere and then it comes out only when we need it at a certain occasion.
I'm going to make a distinction that may be useful. The Chicago Statement is designed to govern what the university, through its administration, can do. It's to say that the policy of the university is that all of the students and faculty have freedom of expression and they can't be subjected to any kind of university punishment based on the content of what they say. To that extent, it is an analog for the First Amendment functioning in government. That's important. I think that's important, and the kind of cases that FIRE handles shows that it's important, and that's something that has to be addressed. But that's probably not the major problem on university campuses now. I can speak about Georgetown a little bit. I have some insight. My daughter's a student there, so I actually get to see what the students are doing and saying. The real danger to freedom of expression on university campuses comes from the social pressure imposed by other students on people who have, let's say you were going to vote for Trump. Let's say you have a conservative political position. The amount of vituperation and bad comments directed towards you is so oppressive that it does a pretty good job of suppressing people, getting people to suppress themselves. And that has nothing to do with the Chicago Statement. It has nothing to do with university policy. It's a feature of the student body itself. And it's not the majority of students. It's a minority of highly active, social media active students who can make it completely oppressive for political positions that they don't like. Georgetown has an undergraduate Federalist Society. And the people who are part of that group and are trying to have events or bring in speakers are subjected to so much so much grief and bad feeling and sort of things that are designed to be insulting to them that after a while, it's hard for them to function. That's a real danger that exists, and the Chicago Statement doesn't touch it. I mean, that's something I'd love to know what we could do something about, but it's a feature of the cultural climate at least a university like Georgetown these days.
Thanks, John. We're getting just about to time, but I thought I would throw one other thing in, and it goes back to what one of the things Mary talked about at the very beginning of the session, which is that the Chicago Statement has been around for 5 years now. There has been a little bit more of a lull in the passage and adoption of the Chicago Statement. Perhaps inevitably, as the novelty wears off, and sort of the sense of urgency at the beginning maybe wears off a little bit. But if we're going to make a continued case for it in terms of showing that it can actually make a positive difference. One way of looking at it, and in the question where I've responded with a bunch of links, I am adding a couple of more. One thing I might point to is that last year we released a survey, a new report where we did a quantitative examination of the climate for free expression at several dozen universities. I think it was 55 colleges, and we, based on a number of factors for the overall climate for student expression, how what students' tendency to self-censor was, how comfortable they were sharing their opinions in class, various things like this. And based on the survey results of about 20,000 students at 55 different institutions, we came up with a quantitative measure that that ranked the 55 universities on their climates for free expression. The University of Chicago came in first in this ranking. Georgetown came in a little bit lower. It came in 48th. But one, what it might suggest, if you look at the schools that filled out the top 10, most of them were universities that have FIRE's green light rating for free speech. So these are universities that kind of top to bottom have have good speech policies that have a good fidelity to First Amendment principles. A number of them, the University of Chicago included, also have a good, also have the Chicago Statement in effect. Now, when it came to to doing these rankings, the smallest weight was given to the policies that were in effect. So it definitely did not have, I don't think, a determinative effect on how universities were ranked. It carried a smaller weight. But I think there is something to say, that with good policies, that can help inform a good culture of free expression. I think John also makes the excellent point that as I think a number of LSAT instructors would have once tried hammering into my head, that it's a necessary but not sufficient condition for having a good overall climate of free expression. There are a lot of kind of cultural factors that go into it, ones that are much trickier, ones that don't really have as good an answer in First Amendment law. They get to deeper rooted cultural things that are thornier to figure out, and a challenge to civil liberties organizations like FIRE. But I think the work we've done there is one of the things that suggests that it may be able to be done. And I think with the Parrhesia program at Chicago that Leila has been discussing, I think that's a really good illustration of how how these principles are put into action. And it's a slow job, but hopefully in informing a better culture of free expression at a university. So we're at time, but I would say that if there's a message to leave on, I would say it is tough, but have faith, and you can see real results from pursuing these kinds of policy changes. And I would encourage any professor watching this, or any professor that's interested in doing this, that it's not easy, as people like John will tell you, but it is definitely worth doing. And on that, I really think we are just about out of time. If any of my panelists want to throw any last thoughts in before we go?
Yeah, Peter, before we sign off, I personally want to thank you and FIRE for what you do. You just talked about your survey of student opinion. You have no idea how valuable that is to those of us in the universities. And I can even explain why. If the people who are working on these things are usually on university committees, the only thing we have in common is we're old. Like, we are full professors, we're all old. One feature of being old means that if we're left-wing liberals, it's the 1960s version. And the 1960s version of left-wing cares about freedom of expression. So the fact that you do a survey like that, and I can walk in and show people, look, at Georgetown, we've got this culture of oppression, it matters. It makes people look up. It makes it more possible for us to make a change. What you do at FIRE is ammunition for those of us that are at the university that we can use to help persuade our administrators, because the older guys will listen. So please keep doing it. My ability to say FIRE had us in the red list or the yellow list was a big help in getting us to adopt the Chicago statement. That's just my way of saying thanks to what you're doing. It's amazingly useful to us.
Thank you very much, John. And a quick apology to our viewers. I just noticed that for the last few minutes, my video was off. So you were, while I was talking for a couple of minutes, just looking at a big logo of a flame. I don't know. I don't know who, like, why that was as such. I don't know how long it's been there. So I apologize for that. And John, I thank you very much for your kind words. One thing I'll add, I think we're planning on doing another bigger version of that survey. In fact, I think we might already be at work on it right now. So yeah, it was definitely a game-changing project for us, and one that we're gonna keep at. And with that, I'll say thank you very much to John, to my colleague Mary, to Leila. Thank you so much for the insights that you shared with us, for taking the time out of your days, for putting yet more of your time into Zoom, which is where so many of us seem to live these days. Thank you for helping out with this discussion. To everyone who watched, a number of our faculty members I recognize, a number of FIRE supporters. Thank you for making what we do possible. And we will hopefully be back in a few weeks with another one of these in our webinar series. Thank you very much, and everyone take care.
Thank you all.
Bye.